morning, everyone, and welcome to Women in the Word. My name is Michelle, and welcome to the Torah portion day, which is Akarei Mot. There we go. And it means afterwards or after the death. And this talks about after the death of Aaron's two sons. But we're going to be talking about a different person today, and her name is Bathsheba. And we're going to actually incorporate in chapter 18 of Leviticus is where we're going today. But before we start, can I get you, Glennis, and you to pray for us this morning?
Yes, Heavenly Father, we just come before you, Lord. We give you all the glory and the praise. We just thank you, Lord, for Michelle, Lord, for all the women who are watching this, Lord, and some, even if the men, Lord. I just give you all the glory and the praise, Lord, that our ears will be able to take in what you are telling us today, Lord. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Thank you. That was great. Well, today we're looking at a story, and most people who are in the Bible would be familiar with Bathsheba, and this love triangle, if you like, comes together with her husband and King David. So we're going to look at Leviticus, the Torah portion, which is Leviticus chapter 18, verse 1 to Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1 to chapter 18, verse 30. Is the portion. Now, chapter 16 is about the death of Aaron's sons and the Yom Kippur service. Chapter 17 is about the service outside the temple. But today, chapter 18 is about the laws of immorality and forbidden relationships. So we're going to go straight through to Leviticus chapter 18, verses 19 to 20. And Norma, can you read today? It's only a couple of scriptures. Can you read that for me today?
That's Leviticus 16, is it?
Leviticus chapter 18. Just go
Leviticus
to
18.
Verses 19 to 20.
You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind.
No.
You shall not sow your field with mixed seed, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you.
Is that verse 8?
Whoever lies carnally with...
Is that chapter 18, verse 19?
That's 8.
In Leviticus?
I'm sorry, I'm reading from 19. So it's 18,
18
chapter 18, verse 19.
Verse 19 and 20.
You shall not approach a woman and uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her customary impurity. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Is that it?
That's it. Thank you very much. Anybody got a different version to that? No? So, Glennis, can you read chapter 2 Samuel, chapter 11, verses 1 to 4, please? Right?
Yep.
Okay.
And it happened at the return of the year, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David still stayed in Jerusalem. And it was at evening that David got up from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman immersing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look at. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And someone said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And David sent messengers messengers and took her, and she came into him, and he lay with her, and she was purified from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house.
Thank you. That was great. Right. So there are our scriptures for today. So we've got the laws of sexual immorality and impurity, and covering a person's nakedness, a woman's nakedness. And this is where we're going with Bathsheba today. So let's look at Bathsheba, and we're going to have to look at her name, the meaning of her name first. And according to her name in Hebrew, and I've got 1339 and 1340, that's the Strong's Concordance. Her name means daughter of oath or daughter of wealth. And we see that another which is Bathsheba. Bathsheba means a daughter of wealth. And we see that we've already studied Judah's wife, and here her name was Bathsheba as well, but she was a Canaanite woman. But Bath means daughter, or the seventh daughter in this case. But there is actually a Bathsheba, which was actually named of a specially fine fig. This is a woman who is renowned. She is a woman of godly character, and yet she's there and she's bathing, and the king goes up and has on the rooftop. He's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he should be out with his soldiers, but he's not. So let's look at verse 1 of 2 Samuel chapter 11. It happened in the spring of that year. It is the summertime, and the kings go forth on military battles, where there is an abundance of hay and pasture in the fields for the horses, and vegetables and fruits for the soldiers, according to Rashi. Now, when there was battles in David's day, they didn't usually do it in the winter time where there was no food or anything. And it was wet and muddy. They preferred to fight their battles in the summertime. They were fighting the people of Ammon and trying to take the city of Rabbah. So David gets restless one night. He wakes up and he decides to go for a walk to the rooftop of his house. And in that, he's just minding his own business, so you think, and he looks around and he spies a woman who is taking a bath. And it's not a bath like we would do, where we just fill up the bathtub and get in it and have a bit of a soak and a rest and a relaxation. This was a specific type of bath. This was it was a purification bath, which means that she was probably at the end of her impure time, and on the seventh day of at the finish of her menstruation, she would then have a bath. So any questions, any knowledge on how much do you know about Bathsheba? Do you know any more than what I do? If you do, please tell me. And because I thought she was on the rooftop as well. I thought he was standing there and he was on the rooftop and she was on the rooftop, and that's where he saw her. Did anybody else think along that lines?
No, yeah. And you're saying that she wasn't on the rooftop?
Well, no. Is that what you were taught, Norma? Were you taught that she was on the rooftop as well?
I think it says he looked down, so if he was on the rooftop, but I just don't understand how he could see that she was so beautiful if all she had was candlelight.
Well,
it would be almost...
Yes, it is, isn't it? Is because this is in my Bible, when it says that then it happened one evening, in my Hebrew Bible, which is the Stones edition that I've got, it says towards evening. So the purification had to take place towards the evening time. He had been, and so I understand that in that time when the light is dimming, how could he see her? But according to the women in the Bible.net, they too have her on the rooftop. But you're right, the Bible says he looked down. So let me have a look here. And he looked down at her, and she was both ceremonially unclean at the time. But let me see. Bathsheba was ceremonially unclean, and she was at the end of her menstruation, and she was observing the laws of Nida, or menstrual Nida, Niddah, and she was observing the laws for menstrual purity, and was having a mikvah, which is a bath used for the purpose of ritual immersion to achieve ritual purity. So her uncleanness was spiritually unfit. And so these mikvahs, or these pools of water, which would have coming from a stream, they were most likely and not always communal. So in a village, they could have been communal, one for men and one for women, or they could have been in a house, or they could be beside a house. They can have a covering over them, and but they're not necessarily. They don't necessarily have a roof. I've been looking, and they don't necessarily have a roof, but they could have some sort of a protection around them so that people couldn't see. But in this case, the rabbis actually believed that she was actually in a house. And she had some sort of protection of privacy around her. The water had to be at least 150 gallons or 568 litres. It had to be enough water to cover a full-grown man. And the person enters, before she enters, she washes her hands, she washes her feet, she washes her hair, and then she enters in, and I'm sure she at least has to dip once. She says prayers before she enters, she dips, she comes up, she says prayers again, and then she can dip how many ever times, usually 3 times. So she's dipping up and down, because I was wondering, how could he see she was naked? But it's not like our bath. She was plunging up and down in the water gently. And according to Radek, David saw her bathing in her house. So he was on the rooftop, she was not. And it says in Matthew 5:27-28, and this is Jesus speaking, "You shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that everyone who gazes at a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart." And 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, and this is the New Living Translation, "For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure and a craving for everything we see and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but from the world." So how would you interpret this passage of scripture that David is there and he's looking at this naked woman?
I don't know.
You don't know?
He might have seen her outside somewhere, and then he's recognised that woman of beauty or not. I don't know.
Well, so David, that's right. You're hitting it on the head there a little bit, in that you're leading, because Uriah, her husband, actually would have known his King David quite personally, and therefore may have known of or known about Bathsheba, his wife. So let me go there as we jump around a little bit. So Bathsheba's father was Eliam, or Amiah, which means God is gracious, and he was one of David's gallant officers, so he was counted in the mighty men. Her grandfather was Ahithophel, and he means brother of folly. He certainly lives up to that after a while. He was the wisest counselor to King David, and this is conjecture, but they believe and they, meaning the rabbis, actually believe that that Ahithophel was actually her grandfather. He was from Gilo, and you can look according to Joshua 15:51, Goshen, Holon, and Gilo, 11 cities with their villages. And in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 12, then Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gileonite, David's counselor, from the city from Gilo, while he offers sacrifices. And this city is a city of Judah, and thus Bathsheba was most likely from David's own tribe. And Bathsheba came from a God-fearing family. This man, Ahithophel, was renowned for his wisdom and sagacious advice. So he was advisor both to David, and then something happened. He betrays David and joins Absalom, his son, and who was trying to make himself king at that time. And why is this a mystery? Because they don't understand what really and they mean the rabbis don't understand what really took place, but maybe it was the way David treated Bathsheba or his unbridled ambition, according to Miktav Me Eliyahu. So let's have a little bit further look before we go right into the scriptures. She is the mother of 5 sons. The firstborn died, Solomon, Shemaiah, Shobab, and Nathan, all by King David. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 5, these were born to him, this is David, in Jerusalem, Shemaiah, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon, 4 by Bathsheba, the daughter of Amiel. So,
sorry, I'm just thinking that's where Mary's line come from, Nathan, wasn't it?
It is, and Glenys is correct, because Glenys, a couple of weeks ago we talked about Mary and that Mary's lineage comes from Nathan. Well, Nathan is one of the sons of Bathsheba.
All right.
Okay, as well as Solomon. And while you're on there, in Matthew chapter 1, verse 6, the verse speaks of the lineage of Jesus through the wife of Uriah, whom we now know is Bathsheba. So her husbands were both Uriah the Hittite and King David, and this is her story. She's about 16 to 19 years of age at this particular time. She's already married. So what really does happen? David sees the woman and he desires for her is aroused. Now, David has 6 wives at this time, 6 wives. So let me just get his notes. Here we are. And they were with him in Hebron, which he reigned and ruled for 7 years. Their names are Ahinoam, the Israelite, Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite, Maacah, the daughter of the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and Haggith, Abital, and Eglah. Now, he had all these wives before he came up to Jerusalem. This all takes place in the city of Jerusalem. And so he looks over and he is aroused by a naked woman. It's, you would think that as the king, 6 wives would be enough. It's a lot. It would be a lot. And they should have satisfied him sexually, but no, that wasn't the case. He deliberately pursues Bathsheba and finds out who she is. She is married and to one of the mighty men, and this knowledge should have persuaded him to change course, and he didn't. He didn't take that into account at all. And the messengers are sent with a royal decree from the king, and Bathsheba is summoned. So this is my understanding of this passage, this 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 to 4. The messages, and they took her, and this word took is in Strong's 270 in the Hebrew, to seize, often with the accessory idea of holding in possession. And this word took can also imply marriage. How could she refuse a request from the king? So they sleep together and have sexual relations. They basically had sex. And this has got nothing to do with love and appears to be physical attraction on his part. So let's look at Uriah. Who is he? His name it means my light is Jehovah, light or flame. He's one of the most loyal of David's men. He's among the specially regarded 30 of David's army, according to 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 34. And that's they say there's 37 mighty men in that chapter. He's an elite soldier. He dwelt among the Hittites. He could have been one of the original Jebusites, inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, before Jerusalem was named, it was called Jebus, Jebus, so it suggests that Uriah might have been a high official, or perhaps the intended successor of the last Jebusite ruler of Jerusalem. So he was not just somebody that was dragged in off the street type of thing. He wasn't just an ordinary husband. He actually appears to be this really lovely man. And he just was so loyal to David. He didn't think anything of what was going on or the matter. He just was there to serve his king. Now, the Hittites were the descendants of Heth, who was the son of Canaan, according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 15 to 20, according to BibleInfo.com. He was loyal to the God of Israel. He was a dedicated soldier. He was accomplished in his duty. Uriah was respectful. He was committed to his leaders and to the country of Israel. He was firm to principle. He was trustworthy. He was obedient. He exuded great loyalty. And according to Radak, which is one of the rabbis, Uriah was either a proselyte, in other words, he became a Jewish legally, of Hittite descent, or an Israelite who dwelled in the Hittite area. And David actually had 2,300 mighty men. But there's these notable ones of about 37. So he looks a really good man to get married to. He looks responsible. He looks trustworthy. He's dependable. And David does this thing where he's now looking at his wife. And he's now entering into his mind that she is desirable. And he doesn't take one bit of thought about who she belongs to and and whether he should withdraw from his actions. So he sees her, she's naked. Any comments so far?
It's sort of, it's a bit like today, the rule is that what the king wants, the king gets at all expense.
In this day, the king's word and command was obeyed. And so in verse 4, the scriptures talk about that did David uncover her nakedness?
Well, he did.
Right. How did he uncover her nakedness?
By laying with her, having intercourse with her.
That's the sexual immorality part of Leviticus's law, that you do not lay with you do not have sexual intercourse with your neighbor's wife. You do not lay with her. You do not look at her. You do. And Jesus actually took it further and says you do not lust after her. So we just have to look at what the word nakedness means. So let me go back.
It seems to be the opposite what he was. He was started off pure, but she was a pure and everything, and then he was the opposite,
Yes, it makes you think, doesn't it, when you have
like
the laws of God in front of you, and then you apply it to this story, and you think, well, did he uncover her nakedness? What did he actually do? And it says he will go back. You shall not approach a woman in a time of unclean separation. You shall not come near her to cover her naked uncover her nakedness. And it means in that law, it means that you do not have sexual relations with a woman who is menstruating. That's what they call uncover the nakedness in this law. And so when he summoned her and she came and he laid with her, she was actually considered clean. She actually, the Bible, the Word of God talks about that David did not uncover her nakedness. He did not transgress the Torah prohibition of having relations with a menstruant woman, rather, because he must have known that when she was dipping in that bath, that she was at the end of her period. And when you look at it in a woman's cycle, so we're just going to get a little personal here, and I'm sort of stepping into my little bit of background of my medical background. And a woman's period is like 28 days is the normal cycle. And a woman to be able to get pregnant has only a 4-day window, 4 days. So this whole thing about if I go to bed with someone, I won't get pregnant. But if you're in your 4-day window of fertility, pregnancy is a high outcome of it. So for her we know that she actually, there are consequences. We haven't got to that yet, but I'm just introducing this 4-day window that from the time he sees her at the end of 7th day, and not all periods end on 7 days, but normally this is what we call the normal pattern of a woman's cycle. And then he thinks about it, so he's pondering on it. Then he sends the messengers. So could there be some time between him seeing her on the 7th day in the evening to the time he lays with her? Could there be? Because if you go to 2 Samuel 11:5, because after this it's like, wait, there's more. Because when the interlude was over, Bathsheba returns to her house. She doesn't stay the night, and that was supposed to be the end of the matter. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, we had a little saying for this particular thing. When a man and a woman met one another, were physically attracted to one another, went somewhere and had sexual relations with one another, when it was over, they got up and they went their separate ways, and they didn't then contact or have any further contact with one another. We used to call that in my day. I don't know what you would call it today. I didn't ask my young ones what they would deem what it's called, and it was called a one-night stand.
I think today it's quite common.
Yeah. Today, probably sexual immorality today is not as is more prevalent. And this was in a day where, and we're talking about 900. David died in 970 BCE. So we're talking about the 900s BCE. And she was supposed to, the death of Bathsheba is about 962 BCE. So in the 900s BCE, marriage was everything. A woman looked forward to marriage. The parents would actually arrange the marriage. Excuse me. And this is what happens. And it said she went and afterwards she returned to her house. And as far as David was concerned, that was the end of the matter. But wait, there's more, because verse 5 happens, and she says 3 words. The woman conceived. So now she notices she's missed a period, and she's now knows she's pregnant. And she sent a message in which she told David, I am pregnant. 3 words that he did not want to hear, because as far as he was concerned, it was done. He was satisfied, and there was no consequences. So this is where I'm going. Maybe it took a little bit longer between the 7th day, and we know the window from a normal cycle is between day 10 and 14. in a normal cycle. Now, how do I know this? Well, I worked for my husband, who was an obstetrician gynecologist for many, many years. And so every time women came in, you take the pregnancy, which is 40 weeks, 9 months and 1 day from the beginning of your period. And you add 9 months plus a week. That's how we get the time of the baby's arrival. So a little bit of medical knowledge there. And so, which begs the question, how long did he wait? Because if he waited a few days, then she would have been in her fertility window, which she was. And he didn't say, there was no sex education back then, and he didn't ask her, well, where are you in your cycle? He didn't ask her, and obviously protection was not around then, because according to my understanding of Jewish teaching, there's a reason. It could be one of the reasons why men have to also do mikvah from seminal emissions is that every sperm is looking for an egg. I'm being very medical today. So when there are sexual relations, then the sperm doesn't find an egg, a potential life is lost or considered dead. And that is one of the reasons, if you touch a dead body, you go and do purification. Also, after you have sexual relations, you go and do purification. You're considered unclean. That this is what my understanding of the Jewish teaching today is, that every time a man and a woman or husband and wife come together, it is to bring them into procreation. It's one of the reasons, because the man is commanded to not only get married, but to have at least 2 children, and a boy or girl preferably, according to my Jewish law book. And I'm going, well, you can't order children like that, but you can
didn't
certainly...
happen to me.
It did to me, actually. I thought I was very clever. What about you, Norma? Did you think you were very clever when you had like a boy and a girl? But you've had more than... You're like me. You've had, what, 2 boys as well? She's nodding. So, as well. And I thought I was very clever when the little girl snuck herself in there. And so
I just had 3 boys.
But then when they get married, you get 3 daughters, which is lovely, isn't it? So Bathsheba plays an almost entirely passive role in this chapter and only utters 3 words: I am pregnant, or I have conceived. Not music to David's ears. And because David summons her for her pleasure, this is from myjewishlearning.com. He's moved by lust at the sight of her. It's a one-time only event as she returns to her house afterwards. And this is what happens afterwards. And is this going to be after the death? And this is, sadly, it does result in death from these actions, the consequences of it.
It's the same old thing. You reap what you sow.
Yes, that is good Proverbs there. You do.
Measure for measure.
Measure for measure. There is consequences to their actions. So it's a one-time only event as she returns to her house. She carries the results or the evidence of the tryst in her body. She alone risks the death penalty for adultery given her husband's absence, the resulting pregnancy, and the king's absolute power. So did she have the opportunity to say no? And could she actually say no to the king's request?
Probably not. It's a bit like Esther. She was, whatever the king said.
That's right.
Yep.
David himself does not deny his role in the conception. According to Zohar, Uriah was last home, this is technical, on the 7th of Sivan, which is May-June, which is the 3rd month of the ecclesiastical calendar. And while Bathsheba lived with David on the 24th of Elul, August to September, which is the 6th month, more than 3 months later. So it was clear that the father was David, according to Melbourne. Now, he's in a quandary. He's in a quandary. So why couldn't the adultery laws, the consequences of the adultery laws, be enforced? Let me read them. The Leviticus chapter 20 verses 10, also in Deuteronomy chapter 22, if a man commits adultery with another man's wife, even with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. And this was the law that was enacted in John chapter 7 verses 58 through to John chapter 8 verses 1 to 11, where the Pharisees brought the woman to and threw her at Jesus' feet, who'd been caught committing adultery. So why in this case could not these laws be enforced?
Because he was a king, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or he was covering them up, so.
He was. Well, being a king, you have all these people around you who take orders from you, and today you would sign a confidentiality clause. So I would have said they signed some sort of a clause, and he would send his most trusted messengers to go, the ones that knew what was going on in the palace, but said nothing. So one of the reasons could be that there was no witnesses that would testify against him.
Right.
He would have had to have been brought before the Sanhedrin, and he would have had to have 2 witnesses. One's not good enough because there's no verification of what that person said. But 2 witnesses that were quality could vouch and could say, yes, this man committed adultery. But if all the people around you are basically see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, then he thought he was safe.
But God was watching.
He was. So while David had no intention of continuing the liaison, the pregnancy embroils him. David does not go to God about the matter, but starts to concoct a plan and implement it. So, here I've got it here. So David comes across, and he is a very powerful, charismatic, politically clever and man governed by his emotions. And it's just amazing. And I looked up his mother, and in Jewish tradition, David's mother is Nitzaveh bat Adael, according to Hanan bar Rava. And David's father, of course, is Jesse, whose grandmother is Ruth. So, and it comes forth. And yet David comes across as this man. But if you go and actually look up this lady, his mother Nitzaveh, Nitzvevet, there's a story about David and how he was basically, I was going to say abandoned by his father, that his father did not accept him. And it's so I encourage you to go and look her up and look at this story about her relationship with David. Let me have a look. The Talmud relates. So was David and Bathsheba guilty of the sin of adultery? And it's really amazing. So if you go into the Midrash and Agadah, the Talmud relates that the Rabbi Judah, the prince, who was descended from the Davidic line, sought to defend David, because now what David's doing is he's now designing that the child becomes the child of the husband of Bathsheba. He's trying to now organize, and he's now bringing in people. If you continue to read on, David sent a message to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David, and Uriah came to him, and David inquired after the welfare of Joab and the welfare of the people and the welfare of the warriors. And David then said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. That's what, so he's now trying to figure out a way where Uriah now can go to Bathsheba and have marital relations with Bathsheba so that the baby can be declared his. And there's in the rabbinical writings, it actually tells you that in the days of Egypt, the women would actually have children, but they were all born early, at least 7 months. They were born like 7 months. And I thought, in that day, Lord, and having my knowledge about what a 7-month or an 8-week preemie baby looks like and struggles, that God had to have his hand on them miraculously for 7-month babies, 7-month pregnant babies, like how do I say this? 28-week babies, I'll do it in my medical knowledge, that are born need assistance. But in that hour, when God said they probably were born, you know, with 8 weeks prematurely, then God would have to miraculously mature the lungs and everything. And so this was his machination, was he was actually trying to get the husband to have marital relations and pass the baby off as his, as Uriah's. And then when that didn't work, he thought of another plan. And you think, well, this is not good. He's the king and he's thinking all these plans, and the sin now is being perpetuated because he's trying to get out of this trouble he's now finding himself in. And so this man, Rabbi Judah the prince, was a descendant from the Davidic line and sought to defend David. He argued that when Nathan the prophet reproached David, which you'll see in chapter 12, Samuel 2, chapter 12, verse 9, and he goes to him, why have you flouted the command of the Lord and done what displeases him? He chastises him about something that he wanted to do but did not commit. David might have intended to sin, but his actions did not exceed the bounds of halakha, which is Jewish law. So David did not engage in adultery. So this Nathan the prophet is sent by God to basically go, I'm now uncovering your cover-up, because that's what it was. And so this person is basically vouching for David. And David did not engage in adultery because it was customary during the monarchy of the Davidic line for a man to write a conditional writ of divorce for his wife when he set out for war, which stipulated that if he were to die on the battlefield, his wife would be retroactively divorced from the time of his departure for the battlefield. Now you know why in the New Testament Jesus deals with divorce, because this is which was a conditional writ. It was in David's time. This practice was meant to prevent women from becoming agunot, A-G-U-N-O-T, which means chained, the women barred from marrying. Since Uriah had prepared such a writ of divorce, which today is called a get, for Bathsheba, and he was killed in the fighting, Bathsheba was no longer a married woman when David had sexual relations with her. Now, this is his defense. And you're shaking your head, you go, wow. So this is the defense, that when David took her, that she was technically divorced. Furthermore, since Bathsheba was then unmarried, this act of intercourse constituted an act of marriage. Despite its unseemly nature, the act did not formally constitute a transgression. So what is your comment to that?
All I can say is God is so merciful. He obviously repented of all those things. Then God says he was of God, he loved his heart. Even though he could overlook all the other things, and it doesn't matter what we come with, the filthiest things that we do, God will always take us, accept us. And wow, because if he did it for him, he can do it for us.
I certainly wouldn't mind somebody sticking up for me like that, coming to my defense like that. What do you think, Norma? You have to unmute.
Oh,
There we go.
I'm just concerned about Uriah. Did he know that this had gone on, or was he so devoted to the king that he disobeyed his order? Because usually if the king gives an order, you have to obey it. But
That's
he didn't.
correct.
He didn't go home. And I
That's-
wonder if he knew.
Well, that's correct. You are correct in what you're saying, that yes, he should have, well, David should have taken, if Uriah doesn't obey David's command, what should have happened was he was supposed to take him to the Sanhedrin. But David, being king, could also issue his own outcome, which is what he did. So, and because Uriah was such a man that he actually goes, I can't go down to my wife. All the men are sleeping in the soldiers' quarters. I can't neglect my men. And so that was his argument, and it was he basically disobeyed him. So it further gave King David, a reason why to further investigate the cover-up. In other words, bring him into a position where now his only option, he feels, is to have him not come back from the battlefield. In other words, for him to die, which is amazing.
It's almost as if he's heard the voice of the Lord and he said, there's something going on here, don't be a part of it.
Yes. And it's like Bathsheba. Oh, sorry, Norman, was you going to say something more?
Or, perhaps he was such a devoted man that he wasn't going to leave the king's side. You just don't know. He was such a good man, according to what we've just heard.
Well, this is the first battle that
you don't know, and we'll probably never know.
That's right. We don't know. We can only surmise and go to our rabbinical writings from the rabbis. But this is the first battle that David does not head up himself. He gives it over to his senior military leaders. And there is a reason for that. So in the Midrash Agadah, Bathsheba plays a secondary role in the Midrashim about her husband and her son. So she is never punished for her and David's relationship, which implies that the rabbis viewed her as a righteous, guiltless woman. The rabbis further emphasized that God forgave David for his sin against Uriah and endorsed David's marriage to Bathsheba, because this is a little further down the track, down the scriptures, once you get into chapter 12 of 2 Samuel. During Solomon's life, the rabbis portray Bathsheba as a positive influence on Solomon, rebuking him when he strayed from righteousness. And she is portrayed in the Midrash as a modest woman who carefully observes the law of purity. But in the homiletical approach, which is the art of the general principles of the specific rhetoric to the specific art of public speaking, in other words, this is the exegesis homiletics, not hermeneutics. That's the approach. Bathsheba had been designated as David's wife during the 6 days of creation. The fact that her son Solomon continued the royal dynasty of the Davidic line cleared David and Bathsheba of any reproach. Although David and Bathsheba were intended for one another, the time had not yet come for them to marry. So God let her become the wife of Uriah the Hittite, according to Zohar. So the Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin. It gets really interesting.
Any way of putting it?
How the rabbis are putting it nicely, because actually this is not supposed to be taught in public. It's only supposed to be taught in the classroom. So we're a classroom today, and because, well, yes, it's like this is not good, because David is seen in a negative light, and yet David has the heart of God. Babylonian Talmud Sanhedrin 107a, verses 1 to 18, and it's well worth looking this up. The William Davidson Talmud states that Bathsheba was predestined to be David's wife from the beginning of creation. Rava taught, what is the meaning of that which is written? For I am ready to stumble, Letzela. and my pain is always before me, which is Psalm 38:18. Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, was designated fit for David for the 6 days of creation. So here we have it. Rava interprets that the term Letzela is referring to Eve, who was taken from the side of Selah, of Adam, the first man, and explains that she was destined for him. This is Bathsheba to David, just as Eve was destined for Adam. So both Bathsheba represents Eve and David represents Adam prophetically. But she came to him through pain. And likewise, the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, was designated fit for David, but he partook of her unright before the appointed time. David would have ultimately married her in a permitted manner after the death of Uriah. This is what they're saying. The rabbis are saying. David brought himself to undergo an ordeal and failed. And this was the test of the eyes. He actually said, you know, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were all given tests. They didn't know about it, but they passed them. And David goes, well, I'm not the God of David. He's not the God of David, because David went and supposedly asked him for a test, and it happened to be the test of his eyes, which he failed. God said to him, I will subject you to an ordeal, and I will perform a matter for you that I did not perform for the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who all passed their tests. As for them, I did not inform them of the nature of the ordeal. While I'm informing you that I will subject you to an ordeal involving a matter of a married woman with whom relations are forbidden. So now the rabbinical writings are lining up with Leviticus 18, verse 20, where it is forbidden to have relations with a married woman, and especially who is not your own wife. The verse states, and he walked upon the roof of the king's house. From the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very fair to look upon. Bathsheba was shampooing her hair behind a beehive. So this is where there was an awfully big beehive, wasn't it? Which concealed her from sight.
Buzz.
It's really funny. But if you keep reading, some of them will translate it as a wicker screen. And Satan came and appeared to David as a bird. David shot an arrow at the bird. The arrow severed the beehive, and Bathsheba was exposed, and David saw her. It's really funny, but it is, and it's like the wicker, the wicker screen. It did the same thing. David asked God, clear him from transgression. So this is him asking for forgiveness, according to Psalm 19. Verse 14, that it be not written in the Bible, but God said, and this was this account. David was asking him to clear him of this great transgression so it wouldn't be written into the Bible. And the Lord and God said, that is impossible. David implored him, Master of the universe, forgive me for that entire sin. God said to him, your son Solomon will already write in his wisdom, according to Proverbs chapter 6, verses 28 to 29, can a man walk on live coals without scorching his feet? It is the same with one who sleeps with his fellow's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. This passage portrays the sin of adultery as a burn, whose marks are visible forever. David asked, is there no remedy for this sin? And God answered him, accept upon yourself tribulations. And he accepted. And David was afflicted with spiritual leprosy for 6 months, and the divine presence abandoned him, and the members of the Sanhedrin disassociated themselves from him. What a story.
Sounds like a novel.
It is. If you go into this reading of the Sanhedrin, BT Sanhedrin 107A, it is well worth reading. It's if we found it funny, and it is, because this is how the Talmud views this sin. And we know accordingly that that this sin marks his rule and his reign and his life, because in 1 Kings chapter 15 verses 4 to 5, nevertheless for David's sake the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by setting up his son after him and by establishing him in Jerusalem. because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and had not turned aside from anything that he had commanded him all the days of his life, except the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Because David preempted God, that matter is always before him.
It's just like, I just sort of think only a man could think of some of these things, you know. I mean, it's just, I mean, if God wanted him to marry Bathsheba, wouldn't he have made that connection with him? I mean, you know, or it just, I don't know, it just sounds like excuses, but maybe that's the truth, but it just sounds like excuses to me.
It was like, can it get any more? To us, it sounds quite bizarre, but it's the way the Jewish rabbis, they're taught to think. They're taught to see in pictures and colour and everything. And I'm going, in our thinking, we're pretty well black and white, our Greek Christian thinking. We would never have thought of Satan coming to David as a bird and him shooting an arrow, and he misses and he hits the beehive or he hits the wicker screen. And it's just amazing. You've muted yourself.
Norma, you've muted yourself.
Oh, are they covering up for David?
Well, they actually are, because the whole thing about reading the Jewish writings, that they like to bring people together, and they like to think, and the rabbis always say something nice about people. And so they've got more of a fear of Lashon Hara than we do, and that which is slander and gossip. And so they tend. So I noticed that the Jewish writings always, and the rabbis always want to bring people back together. They always want to say something lovely about someone, and that, because really you look at Bathsheba, and even though they say she wasn't punished, and oh no, how could David be punished? Well, David is the one that's the king, and David's the one that's doing all these machinations, and David's the one that's trying to get himself out of some trouble, you know, the consequences of his actions. And David's the one that didn't think that he shouldn't have touched Uriah's wife in the first place. He just didn't think. And there's a whole story in the Talmud about why he didn't think, and it talks about the smallest member on the body of a man. And
it's true today.
Yes, we won't go into that because we have young ladies watching this, but I just encourage you to go and read that for yourselves. And so even that is quoted how we think today. And it is just how they bring it all together. And yet David continues to be a man after God's own heart. And that you know, the whole thing about Bathsheba, she wasn't punished, but was she really? And as you go into this story, and we haven't got time to go any further today, but Pastor Greg on the Torah portion, which you can watch every Saturday from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, also goes into this, and he's much more knowledgeable than I am, and very well worth watching the Torah portion. And so he does this, but she actually, I felt that in the way she did get punished, she loses in the end. The machinations cause her to lose her husband, and I don't believe, from my understanding, that they are told what David did, and then she goes and she loses her firstborn. And so in a way, it might not be in the punishment from God, but it certainly is, if the child is allowed to die, then it must be the punishment is from a woman's grieving perspective.
Yeah, she's definitely a pawn, you know. She was just, yep.
It's so God makes it up to her in the end when he crowns her son, or Solomon king.
He does, and that's.
I wonder if she.
You're right there, Norma. He does. He actually, she's known as Uriah, the wife of Uriah, in the lineage of Jesus. She's also, and that's a really good place to stop. today. We actually run out of time, and to bring forth her son, who is crowned and sits on the seat of the king, as king on the Davidic line, which God has also promised them. So on that note, we'll finish. And our time is up, and we can pick this up again next year and go further into what happens. So I'll say God bless you and goodbye for today, and we'll see you all next week.
Yep, very good.
Thanks,
Bless you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.